stand a ghost of a chance, or spiritualism, mediumship, channeling, and related phenomena in the light of the Rosicrucian philosophy. That's long enough. The talk may not come out well, and the reason it may not come out well is very funny. A few days ago when we were talking about Saturn being potentially related to viruses, in that they are mineral-like plants, and that there's something, the first things that humans can create that relate to life, and that they're associated with colds and selfishness that produces colds and everything like that. And I put forth the speculation, and it certainly isn't a philosophical statement, that by following Saturn, that you could follow the flu or the cold of the year as far as the symptoms that it had. And it's the ridiculous lengths that a person will go to in order to prove a philosophy. Well, from a friend I have contacted the flu of the year, and it is centered in the head, so I'm not certain how well I'm going to be able to hold out in all of this. On Monday, we talked about sensitivity, and we talked about sensitivity in relation to clairvoyance. We said that sensitivity was the primarily it was a result of being loosely connected with the vital body to the physical body. When we spoke about sensitivity, we said that it wasn't a virtue, or that it wasn't a talent, and that in some forms sensitivity was not even desirable, especially if it was out of control. We could have elaborated on a lot of other things beside the fact that sensitivity was associated to a loose connection between the vital body and the physical. And we could have, or we did note, for example, that animals don't have their vital bodies completely in the physical, and as a consequence, they are sensitive and clairvoyant. We said that various types of clairvoyant phenomena were the consequence of sensitivity. We weren't comprehensive. We didn't, for example, talk about the clairvoyance that is a result of inbreeding. For example, the second sight that is part of the language of the Scots Highlanders, that when people inbreed, that it produces a greater likelihood to an involuntary clairvoyance and sensitivity. The same thing is true of the so-called gypsies. We didn't mention that in some ways the etheric body can be better engaged, or at least the involuntary clairvoyance can be turned off by the use of wine or by the use of alcohol. In fact, one of the great seers of this century had a type of clairvoyance that was a consequence of heredity. And that clairvoyant drank wine to inebriation until he was absolutely certain that all of the hereditary clairvoyance was wiped out, because he wanted to have completely positive clairvoyance. It isn't an official statement of the Rosicrucian philosophy, but it does seem that some people that have a nature clairvoyance have an inability to keep themselves from alcoholism in order to close off that kind of sensitivity. We also didn't talk about a phenomenon called traveling clairvoyance, or what some people call astral projection, which has nothing to do with leaving the body. What it has to do with is with an extension of the desire body great distances in space, and being able to garner information from those locations in space. Those are all, when you start talking about phenomena, you can talk about all sorts of phenomena. Today we will speak something about leaving the body, or various degrees of leaving the body, because we want to understand that clearly, because we are people who are uncomfortable in the physical world. If you remember, we said that the Rosicrucian philosophy says one of the distinctions about sensitivity is that there is an involutionary and an evolutionary sensitivity. Some people are loosely connected to the physical because they have never really come into it. Other people, which I'm assuming is everyone in the room, is sensitive. Those people are sensitive because they've gone through the physical world. They've graduated, and the physical world isn't enough, and we're wanting to reach beyond. We want freedom. And there is a high degree of freedom when we are removed from the physical body. We have a great deal of motility that we could never have in the physical. At a thought, we can be wherever we want. Now, when we spoke about clairvoyance, we spoke about uncontrolled, involuntary clairvoyance. We said that some of it was involutionary reluctance. And we said that some of it was as a result of not wanting to meet the things of life, that some people reverted and withdrew, sometimes in a great fear, almost in the same way that a little bunny defends itself from a coyote. It sees pictures inwardly. And some people who have enormous fears revert back to an animalistic kind of clairvoyance that is associated with the currents that go this way, up the right and down the left. And we talked then about the nature of negativity, or by negativity meaning, again, not dark negativity. Well, today we are going to speak about dark negativity. We talked about sensitivity, and today we're going to talk about even greater sensitivity, and a sensitivity that is unpleasant and downright dangerous as far as our evolutionary career is concerned. There is jeopardy when one is that vulnerable with that uncontrolled kind of sensitivity. And now we have to introduce some notions by going back to things that we've talked about over the past week and a half. We saw yesterday when we talked about post-mortem experiences as they're described by Rosicrucian seers, we saw that when a person leaves the body in death, they aren't automatically an angel. And that some people have a residue of as many negative desires as they have had here. In fact, some people have primed themselves for death and have made sin bodies. They've made desire bodies that are so hard that it may be many millennia before they break down, and they know how to use them. And so when a person leaves the body, they aren't an angel. In fact, this is one of the big reasons why the Rosicrucian philosophy is not in favor of capital punishment. Because if you take someone out of the body, somebody that is extremely antisocial and that has great hatred, especially toward, remember we said yesterday that nothing is punishment. Punishment is another name for vengeance. And vengeance and punishment are both human phenomena. Nature, in all of the spiritual worlds, when we unspin the bodies that we have put together, that's just, we're naturally experiencing what we spun into our lives. That's not punishment. The person who is capitally punished knows that society has a vengeance. You know, there are all those people that say, I'll pull the lever, I'll very gladly do it. And there's a lot of vengeance toward people. If a person has a lot of spunk, sort of like the man from Utah a few years ago, Gary Powers, that was his name? They shot all those people, and they killed them at the firing squad, and his last words were, "Let's do it." He never lost any of his cockiness. If a person then wants to get back at society and is filled with rage and is taken out of their life in the prime of their life, the first thing they do is they find somebody who is on the edge. And they find them when they're vulnerable, and they bother them so that they go out and commit a multiple murder. There are people that are now finding the Rosicrucian teaching. They are doing psychological studies, and they're finding, yes, there is a connection, a very short-time connection between capital executions and mass murders. That it doesn't solve any problem. People are not disposable. You can't just pull the lever on them and they're disposed of. They can do more danger from the inner world than they ever could here. Some people are so malignant that they build desire bodies that they can live in the lower desire worlds and in the etheric realm for centuries or for thousands of years. There are also a number of people in the body that have become inverted, which means they see things backwards, which means they lose the sense of proportion that comes from the true spiritual realization. We've been saying all along, at least 4 times we've gone into the subject, that always forget it. I may have to borrow from you again. Back and forth. This has been going on. Some days he has troubles, some days I have troubles, and between the two of us, we'll end up with a good set. Yeah, cooperation. I lost my train there. We've been talking about the fact that some people realize their divinity, but they realize it in an inverted way. They realize that they are not only God, but they think that they are equal to God in power and in importance. And they set themselves against the divine. And in a way, there is not one Antichrist. There are many Antichrists. There are people that, not thousands and thousands, like they couldn't have a convention and fill a football stadium, but there are people around that have set themselves against the divine. And these people have learned how to study spiritual philosophy, and they study it as much as we do. Only they study it to a different end. They study it to their own selfish ends. And such beings find people who are uncontrolled, involuntary sensitives, especially so loosely connected to their body that they can be taken out, they find them to be easy prey. And their negativity surrounds a lot of the phenomena that we're going to talk about today. So much so that I want to make a point very clearly that if you catch me getting caught in that, please raise your hand or wave or something like that, because I have seen very beautiful Rosicrucian students who have lovely smiles on their face suddenly start talking about mediumship or some involuntary clairvoyance, and they lose those radiant smiles, they lose the compassion, and they get very ugly, very judgmental, and very self-righteous looks on their face, not realizing that what they're saying may be true, but that they have gotten caught in the darkness and negativity of the phenomena. And even though we're going to deal with dark and heavy things, I don't want to get caught in it. And if it looks like things are tending that way, please let me know. We're going to talk about very gruesome things. But We have to talk about reality. Before we can actually talk about the phenomena, we have to introduce, or we have to review something that I haven't introduced in the first place. If you think I'm only going to talk about mediumistic phenomena, you're all wrong. I'm philosopher first, last, and always. Over the past week and a half, we have seen clearly that we as humans function on different levels of existence. As two of my friends were saying to each other, we were walking down the street one time, Charlie, Marie, and I, and Charlie was a very unique guy. Charlie was a guy that was fixing something up and dropped glue on his shoe, and he said, "Wow, that looks shiny." And so he took and painted his whole shoe with glue. He thought this would be permanent polish to his shoe. And then he took about 3 steps and he had alligator shoes. But Charlie was a really ingenious kind of guy. He looked over to Marie and he said, "You know, Marie, on some level, myself might be talking to yourself, and neither of us might know about it." So we function on different levels. But we also function through all of the levels. In fact, when we are at our best, we function through all of the levels. In fact, there are 2 streams, which are actually 2 parts of one stream that the Rosicrucian philosophy goes into in great detail. For example, if we in spirit have a creative impulse and take the general will of the spirit and impel that impulse through an idea into the world of thought, we produce a thought. And if we give enough will to that thought, and if it is in accordance with the intent of the spirit, it gets clothed with desire, with the motivation to do something. And if we have enough will so that it carries through the desire world and actually gets impelled into the etheric world, and it isn't distracted, or if it isn't out of line with what the spirit wants to do, because some things only go as far as the emotional world because that's all that's necessary. But if it takes on enough energy in the etheric realm to become an act, we act on it and we produce some kind of event in the external world. This is one half of the cycle. It is the extroverted half. The spirit wants to do something, and it carries something all the way through from the spirit deep within to the outer world. The other half of the cycle is introverted. Yesterday, we looked exclusively at the other half of the cycle, only in large. We said that when a whole life has been precipitated, the perceptions and the memories of the perceptions of everything that has happened in the physical world, not only the perception, but the breath record, gets impressed through the ethers as impressions in the desire body, in the region of impressionability, where there's enough attraction and repulsion to take on a desire form. And from there, as all of the experience of the physical, the active energy in the vital body and in the desire body, as that all decays, it goes back to the spirit through the mind. We re-feel, we rethink, and we assimilate, absorb and assimilate experience back into the spirit, and the spirit comes to conclusions. This is a healthy cycle. The Rosicrucian philosophy agrees totally with the analytic psychologists that it is important to not be wishy-washy. Let your yays be yays. That is, if you have an impulse from the spirit saying, wouldn't it be nice to do this kind of good work? The Rosicrucian philosophy says, carry it out all the way. It's unhealthy to not carry out your creative impulses or what you know to be true. In fact, the Rosicrucian philosophy goes much further than that. It says that when everything has been proven in the material world, and it worked or it partially worked or it didn't work at all, that experience we must put as much will and as much attention to the memory, to the remembering, to the reacting, to the refeeling, to the rethinking as we put into the original thought. Nothing must be lost. A life is much too precious to just think of it as disposable, to take our creative impulses and just put them out there and let them lay. Every effort is made to see healthier if you carry things out and bring them all the way back. Now, this is something, even though we said yesterday we really didn't get that far enough to say it because it was unbelievably long talk. We talked for 2 hours and we still missed 25% of the talk. Today we have a chance. I'm an optimist. Today, today we have a chance. There are a lot of things between the spirit and between the physical where things can get displaced so that our impulses, we can be distracted, or, we have an idea to do something, and it begins right away in our mind. We say, I'm going to do this. And as soon as you say you're going to do something, the universe gives you your necessary resistance. I learned this when I was in college, that at the time that one was supposed to study for final exams, that's when all the good movies were playing. That there are all sorts of resistances. And if the universe wants you to succeed, but it isn't just a matter of it's going to lay down for you. You have to put forth the effort because this is resistance. To take something from the unknown, from the absolute that is congealed into the material world as the unknown, and to take that and bring it into the worlds of spirit, you have a lot of resistance to overcome. And that's why it takes so many lives. It takes a long time to take something like a brute stone and break it down and bring to it the experience. Just look at us. I've been trying to do this for 33 years, and the amounts of growth that I've made have been tiny, incremental. In fact, some of them I don't even know whether they're even really spiritual growth. They might just be maturity. It might just be because you're a little older and a little more tired that you don't lose your temper so much because it takes too much energy. It takes a long time, and in spiritual things, fast is slow and slow is fast. But at any rate, there are distractions. We can be distracted at the thought level, and certainly we can be distracted at the desire level. You say, oh, I want to do this and this and this, as well as what I set out to do, and you never get done what you want to do. But at any rate, we do have these experiences, and we carry them through, and we bring them back. This is a whole cycle. Sometimes it takes place in a fraction of a second. I used to be, when I was a young man, I was cruel, and I used to hunt, but I was sort of an innocent, and I think I killed very few things in my life. I have great remorse for every one that I killed, but the first time I went hunting with a friend, we had only one gun between the two of us, and I was astounded. A rabbit kicked out, and my friend had the gun, and he aimed the gun, and I barely saw the rabbit. And he was going through this cycle extremely fast. He was seeing, there's the rabbit, that's how much I have to lead it, and he came to those conclusions, and he acted accordingly. Sometimes it's in a flash of a second that we go through the cycle from within to without and such. Now, the distractions aren't all. We can displace our consciousness in other ways. Death really is an ultimate displacement of consciousness. That is, the consciousness is disassociated from the physical and then put into the etheric, and then it is disassociated from the etheric and then into the desire. And this happens naturally. Some people get distracted. Yesterday when we talked about purgatory, for example, we talked about some extremely long purgatories. Or I can give you some other examples. Some people were trying to get to the notion of earthbound spirits. Some people get distracted in such a way that instead of going through the purgatorial existence and going back to the spirit, they resist it. Now, for some people, the not going through the purgatorial existence is very innocent. I can give you an example from the seership of Emanuel Swedenborg. He talks about a lady that was in purgatory, and she sat all the time in front of her little cottage with her little flower garden and her picket fence. And that's what she always dreamed of, that's what she always wanted, and now she had it, and she wasn't letting go of it for anything. And Swedenborg was functioning out of the body, and he said to her, you have other things to do. And she said, what do you mean? And he said to her, you're dead, and there's other work that you should do. She said, no, I'm not dead. I'm just I'm having this little cottage that I've always wanted. And so what he did is he said to her, picture your cottage not being here. And she did, and it was gone. And there was an immediate shock, and from then on she let go, and she could go through the purgatorial existence. There are other people that hang on to the earth for other reasons. We all know, for example, ghosts. Ghost chasers can tell you that a ghost will hang around a place until somebody knows what really took place. For example, if somebody is unjustly accused of a murder, or if somebody has something stolen from them and justice has not been done, they'll hang around the area where they were when the murder was or when the theft actually took place, and they'll stay there until, if someone comes up to them and says, I know what happened, and then the person will be relieved, and they no longer have to hang on because they feel now justice has been done. At least somebody in the world knows that I wasn't the murderer. If you've ever read books on ghost chasers or things like that, you find that in almost all cases, those are the reasons for ghosts that just are familiar with a given place. However, not all of such beings are so much sweetness and love. There are beings that hang around here for power and other grandiose delusions. And some of these beings are quite formidable. In fact, some of them are stronger in death than in life. Some of them, for example, know how to get energy off of things they used to own and attract it to their vital body to make it stronger. Still others know how to vampirize. They know how to they even know how to get into people's desire bodies and stir them up against each other. They can influence them externally, and then there's a fight. And when there's a fight, I don't know how to say it, there's like an opening of the aura. And when there's the opening of the aura, such an individual can come in and they can draw off energy. It's a bad combination to be sensitive and have a bad temper. Very bad combination. Because if you're a sensitive and you lose your temper, beings can just draw off all of your energy, and you're not only poisoned by the bad temper, but you are greatly weakened by the fact that somebody has drawn energy off. We also know from history, we know from Homer's Odyssey and from Virgil's Aeneid, that where blood is released, there is an enormous release of etheric energy where blood is released. I have a friend that is an ethnomusicologist, and he has specialized in the place of rhythm in ritual music. And he has attended Santeria cults. He's seen things like where entities take that are called gods will take and smash people right to the ground and such like that. And recently, he told me an experience. He has a friend that is a drummer for a witch doctor in West Africa. And he was allowed to enter some of the rituals. And he saw the way they do the totems. That is, they ritually kill animals, and as the blood spatters over the totems, my friend isn't even clairvoyant, but he said, I could just see things coming and taking the energy right off of that. So there are beings that are earthbound beings that are quite formidable and malevolent. Sometimes they're up to mischief. Sometimes they're up to vaingloriousness, thinking they have their own divine plans. And there are even minor but hierarchies of demonic beings in the inner world that they serve. You notice that relative to all the other talks, we're making value statements today. And they're value statements about my values. These do not necessarily represent the Rosicrucian Fellowship. I find things like this extremely ugly, and I would much rather talk about principles of love and goodness, but to some extent I think we have to be aware of what the other side does. Now, when it comes to earthbound spirits and how they use sensitives and other beings to their ends, and not all mediumship is done by ugly earthbound spirits. We'll get into all of that. What is always said is the end justifies the means. Like if an earthbound spirit wants to take over somebody's body, they will say, I am a great spiritual master, and I have these great things that I have to bring to the world, and you're the only person, flattery right there, you're the only person that I can bring it through. The end justifies the means. If you point out to that person, you're allowing someone to take over your body, they'll say, but this is important. In spiritual things, the ends are within the means. The quality of our life is not determined after our life is over. The quality of our life is determined as we live our life day by day by day. You can't say, well, at the end I'm going to prove that I'm all right. No, it's what we do along the way, our ends, because in the spiritual world everything flows into everything else. The ends are right within the means. They are right there. In a way, that is true. If one experiences, for example, the life spirit and the consciousness of Christ, it is a life that is ever folding back on itself, and it has purpose in everything. It's like love loving love for love, and it isn't a monotonous thing. It's like it gets more and more bright and more loving all along. At least that's the way I understand the experience of the life spirit. what is usually said, what I have to do is so important that I can't take the time to come back to birth. Well, the people who have impressed me the most in life, the people who have brought salvation to millions of people, that is, people like Buddha, or people like Jesus, or even the Christ. It wasn't above them to come into the physical world. They came in and they humbly lived among us. And if beings take all the time and trouble to come to birth, to carry out their work and be among us, be with us, be part of us, who's to say that some earthbound spirit or some other spiritual agency is above that kind of existence? But I interact with a lot of people, and some of them are interested in spiritualism or channeling or things like that. They say, but the material is so important. Again, it's an ends justifies the means, and in this case it has a special twist. It is an argument from materialism. It isn't the material that makes the difference. It is the life, it is the spirit, it is how we live that makes the difference. And so we have then, this is actually a false statement. I have a bookstore, and before I can put things on the shelf, I have to, I have conscience about what I sell to people. I sell almost anything in astrology because it's very unlikely that somebody's going to harm themselves by reading all kinds of wacky astrology books. But when it comes to the spiritual philosophy, I'm very careful about what I carry on the shelf. So I read a lot of material. And it's really interesting what some of this material is. So I've read channeled material, and it isn't of the quality that is from the same things that are said in mediumistic material or in channeled material are said by people who have reached out and gotten it for themselves. They don't have to, I find channeled material to be insipid. And moreover, the material is not only not better, it doesn't have the inspirational value. Because if you have to depend on somebody else for the truth to come to you, so whoever the guide is or whoever the being is that does that, that's not, that's not very much encouragement. At least the people who are positive, like you read the Max Heindel and you read where he says, well, in my investigation, I learned and added this little gem of truth to the whole of things. That gives you the feeling, well, if he can do it, I can do it. And there is something of a camaraderie whereby people who reach out and work for what they get, that you can feel close to them. All right. Insipid is the psychological equivalent or the intellectual equivalent or the spiritual equivalent of thin soup. It's really sing-song, and it goes into all sorts of things that try to mystify you. Whereas you find things where there is the positive clairvoyance, where gear goes into gear with no slip, that it's direct, it's clear, it's straightforward. Like you take, for example, the Rosicrucian cosmoconception is ultimately clear. In fact, that's its weak point. The weak point of the Rosicrucian cosmoconception is that it's so clear that you think you know it after you've read it. And it may take you a few centuries before you really know it, before it sinks in and you can live it, and that you can have the full experience in yourself. When on the first talk here, I related my experience. I read the Cosmoconception, and I was ready to take the final exam because I just read it with full intensity. And now every year I see what a fool I was. Yes, Ross?
I'm thinking of a friend of mine, almost 30 years, he found one of the channel books much better than our book.
Yeah? All right. Yes. All right. Maybe there is good to insipidity. You know, in my mind that rhymes with. No, I don't want to be totally negative. I like it that that's brought up, because there is nothing that is so dark and that is so bad that there isn't some good in it. I've seen things that are good things in channeled material. It's just a little sing-song for me. All right. The sensitive that is capable of being displaced is called different things, called the medium, and sometimes they even used to refer to themselves as fish, strangely enough. And the common word nowadays is channel. Unfortunately, that's one of those words that is very undefined. I'll give you a number of definitions that I've gotten from conversations with people. Anyone who is sensitive to anything that's happening in the immediate atmosphere is sometimes called a channel. Sometimes anyone who is insightful is called a channel. Sometimes it's even somebody who's thinking is called a channel. But most often they're talking about somebody that is involuntarily clairvoyant, and sometimes an outright medium. I've even run into, in one conversation, I've run into, it's hilarious to me. They were talking about this man. This man channels himself. It's very interesting. It's anytime I run into a word that has too many definitions, I'm kind of chary right away to begin with. I like to look into the history of things, and the first usage that I find anywhere of the word channel in any of these definitions is in the Rosicrucian services, where we are admonished to be self-conscious channels for the beneficial workings of our elder brothers in the service of humanity. Clearly, what is meant in that definition is that we are self-consciously reaching out in concert with the brotherhood and not reaching out, but reaching in, for example, to the realm of life spirit, and self-consciously as a waking activity drawing down or liberating an energy. That's a very interesting use of the word anyway. Have you ever thought about it? In our healing service, we talk about liberating the healing force, when relative to here, we seem like we're in prison, and the realm of life spirit is as free as you can get, because you're even beyond yourself, and you're in the pure love of God that unites us all in altruism. And all the cells are sort of little vortices within that ocean of love. And to think of liberating that, but that's what point of view means. When you're in the life spirit, you have all this love to give, and it is liberated when it is given useful form for positive experience. It's a very interesting use of the word liberation. All right, that's a side trip. All right. The Rosicrucian philosophy, as long as we're talking about the use of the word channel, the Rosicrucian philosophy does not ever in any wise interfere with anyone's spiritual or psychic freedom. We feel it is sinful to put our will onto someone else in any way. We feel that each of us is responsible. That's one of the things about channeling. If you didn't say it, you don't have to be responsible about what you said. I not only am saying things, I have to be responsible for them, and there's a complete record of everything that has been said. All right. It's interesting how the word channeling came from our services to be used in mediumship. We said it a few days ago that those beings that forego their humanity and that give up the right to be creative, they become master counterfeiters. and they'll take their own words and put them against you, I guess. All of the things that we said last week about involuntary clairvoyance, that usually the involuntary clairvoyant is very fearful or has some unnatural fear. For example, one of the most renowned clairvoyants in the world has a great fear about Russians. It's not only fear but conspiracy. I wonder about a lot of groups. I am completely neutral, or pretty much neutral, on the UFO phenomena. I have a lot of things that I could say on that, but that's not within the Rosicrucian philosophy, so I'm going to pass on it. But I become doubtful as soon as I see so many conspiracy theories. It smacks of that kind of consciousness that is there. In a medium, the same kinds of fears are there, and the same likelihood to psychological problems are there, and the same likelihood to become focused in phenomena rather than in meaning, and the same tendency to look at disasters is there. Things are just more grandiose with mediumship, and there's much more glamour, much more flattery, and much more personal focus, and not a lot of objective focus. I suppose you got one of those big lunkers again. You have an automatic reverse on there, too. Ah. I was wondering. I never heard yours click off. Yeah. I was wondering. I never heard yours click off. Yeah. All right. Let's just look at a hypothetical syndrome of how mediumship can develop. For example, suppose someone has problems and has not applied themselves to those problems and withdraws. That withdrawal represents a kind of reversion. And if that withdrawal is strong enough, there is a detachment from the physical body. If a person denies the fact that they're not living their life straightforward, that they're not meeting the challenges of their life, if they deny in such a way, they tend to think then that the problem is coming from outside of me rather than me being a part of it or it being within me. It's then a very short step to go from, if the problem is outside of me, the solution should be outside of me. This is a pretty common psychology. It's the way most people treat medicine. The diseases invade my body, and the doctor puts in medicine, and I have no part of it. I'm just the battleground. Except with psychic and spiritual things, there's that greater withdrawal. You can see that even though the person is in denial, the person has to somewhere inwardly realize that I'm not making it. And because I'm not making it, then such an individual is subject to delusion or subject to flattery. That is to say, like the extreme of denial, or like if you're familiar with much psychology, the paranoid personality. The paranoid personality has all kinds of delusions of grandeur, and that everybody wants them for either good or nefarious reasons, because they think so little of themselves that that if they pump themselves up and say, well, all these people are after me, I must be worth something. If you've ever had many interactions with people of paranoid tendencies, either full-blown or in the neurotic state, you see that they have very, very low self-esteem. But at any rate, one then gets an idea of grandeur that, well, maybe I can serve someone else without having to face life. And they let themselves open.
and the channels of being open are many. There are pendulums and there are divinations. I've asked people with pendulums already to say, could you prove Einstein's theory of relativity for me with the pendulum, please? Step by step by step. I don't know how people think they're going to get absolute truth from something like that without realizing that there's something personally subjective. But some people sit for seances, or some people use Ouija boards or planchettes or all sorts of things like that. They open themselves up and they invite themselves to mediumistic states, which is what a channeling is. Now, there are a number of ways, let's try to get a little more specific about this. There are a number of ways that the etheric body has an aberrant connection to the physical body, and each of them is slightly different. First of all, there is a temporary state that we call shock. There are physical symptoms that you can recognize it, that when somebody is in shock, that the eyes glaze and the heart rate changes. If a person is experienced, you can look down and say, that person's in shock. That's the etheric body is regrouping, and it'll come back to the physical after it has regrouped. There are more long-range states that are completely physiological, such as catalepsy, which is sometimes called suspended animation. Sometimes the spirit goes on vacation, and the person, sleeps, and they sleep for 6 or 8 months, and then they come back into the body. They even carry cards saying, if I appear to be dead, I'm really not, because I'm a cataleptic and I have this happens to me from time to time. Another state that is much more difficult to read is coma. Coma really is when parts of the body are severely damaged, and it takes a long time for them to heal, and in some cases they never heal. We're talking coma happens most frequently with things that have to do with the nervous system. When there is a shock and the etheric fluid cannot get through the nerves. There are other states where the spirit withdraws from the body, such as catatonia, as in full psychosis. When we say that, the body is vegetating, but the spirit is withdrawn into the inner vehicles, and the type of condition or the type of insanity where the break is produces different kinds of psychological states. But we say about such a person that is in a catatonic state, we say they're not all there, which is the perfect thing in the language. That is to say, the spirit isn't getting all the way through the vital body into the physical. The one that we want to talk about is trance. Trance is not a biological condition. It is not due to some breakdown physically that the etheric body has to withdraw and recoup and then come back. It's not purely psychological like catatonia, but it's somewhere in between. It's somewhat voluntary, that the consciousness from the etheric can be removed to the extent that a person is not in control of their physical body. In such a state is where one is taken over in mediumship. I want to look at this relative to something deeply spiritual, because I want to look at the values of this. We began talking, we said that between the absolute and the actual, there is a two-sided state of potential. There is time and there is space. Those are potentials. When we go this way, the relationships are more extensive. When we go in this direction toward time, they are more intensive. Spirit, as we've seen time and time and time again, The more one is in a state of spirit, the faster one is moving, and the more time seems to slow down. It seems like the more time you have until you seem to have eternity. What is in space is matter. And in between pure spirit and matter are states that are somewhat spiritual, somewhat material. In a way, each of these realms, the purely spiritual, the purely material, and what is in between, has different attributes about them. Like, for example, the spirit is filled with life and meaning. Matter is filled with form, almost meaningless form. And the realms in between have forms and life both. The consciousness of the way the cosmos is manifest is that in matter there is a lot of differentiation. Many, many different kinds of atoms. You know, in our physical body is a marvel for the complexity of it compared to the spirit, which is simple. It's unified. And everything in between is mixed. The spirit is totally inward. When we get down to the physical world, everything is completely outward. And in between, there is a within and a without. There is a kind of consciousness for each, that in matter, there's greater subjectivity. If I'm on the other side of the podium from this, I see something different than I see now. It's a subjective. It's singular. We can only see one thing at one time. In spirit, though, everything is universal. One sees the total, the one, the all. And in between, it's relative. We're relatively material, or we're relatively spiritual. There are three forms of government for the three states. In spirit, we are democratic. When the whole cosmos goes to sleep and we're all in spirit, it's democracy. Each of us is equal to the one. Each of us is with the one. So in spirit, there is democracy. In between spirit and matter, it is aristocracy or meritocracy. Who can do the most creating is closer to the spirit. So we'll call it meritocracy. When it comes to matter and when it comes to form, the form of government is monarchy. That is to say, this body is for one being. This body is a temple. It is a temple of a separate focus of the one. It is more than that. It is tailor-made. It has been emanated from the spirit to become condensed into the physical by each of us as a focus. So the principle is one human, one body, one spirit for one body. In fact, it even goes so far is that some spiritual schools say that they don't use the word emanated. They say that the physical body has been excreted. And they go so far as to say, in order to shock the students that are too much enamored with the beauty of their physical body and materialistic, they say the physical body is excrement. It's a very strong statement, but so the physical body is an exact expression of our spiritual and soul being. If somebody takes it over, they can't completely take it over in such a way that they can make it something different. It is an expression of our character. This is one of the big mistakes that Do we have enough time? Ooh, I don't know. Carl Jung, when he wrote his PhD thesis, he tried to prove that mediumship didn't work. He said, I studied these mediums, and he says, I noted the different types of people that came through them. He said they were always of this type and this type and this type. And he said, I came to the conclusion that this was a fractionation of the character. Wrong thinking. Because he describes the whole business, they were different entities, but they could only express according to the character that the body was when the person made it in the first place. Because it would be, I don't know how he made the mistake. I think at this point he would be very embarrassed if you said to him, how could somebody fractionate their character and put it back together in the course of a seance? It's a psychological impossibility. If you've ever studied much about psychology, it just doesn't happen that way. All right, now let's start looking at some of the details. Let's look at the displacement of the etheric body or impingement on the etheric body in various ways. Let's take the most common thing of all, telepathy. We're talking about all kinds of psychic phenomena. Let's talk first about telepathy. The Rosicrucian philosophy says there are two ways that telepathy can be brought about. One of them is ethical, one is unethical. The ethical way is that one thinks a thought very clearly, emanates it, radiates that thought. If another person can pick it up by a sympathetic vibration and tune into it, that is a valid means of telepathy. In general, all spiritual principles have to be general. If you can only have telepathy by projecting thoughts to another person, that is wrong. If what you have to say, if you radiate it out, whoever picks it up, it's like a radio station, that is a valid way of doing it. If you can only read your own past life, you're only your own, that's specific. You're almost like an idiot savant then. You know, like there are idiot savants that you can say, January 18th, 2010, and by the time you have the word out of your mouth, they'll tell you what day of the week it is. There are people that are like that, but they can't dress themselves, and they can't live social lives. See, in spiritual things, you want to have the general power to be able to do the whole thing. You don't want to just read your own past life. You want to be able to read all past lives. And when something is transmitted so that it can be picked up telepathically, it is available to whoever can pick it up. The second way that telepathy takes place is if you direct a thought to another person. It happens relatively easy, especially if one has a very low grade of etheric clairvoyance. A friend once told me that he was working in a large area, open area, and it was that magic hour right after sunset when the ethers come live. And he said, in that moment I saw the etheric aura of my co-worker. And he said, I was looking at it and I was thinking to myself, wow, he's got a rich etheric aura. And the guy said, I turned around and went back to my work, and he said, the next thing you know, the guy was in his face. And he said, what were you just thinking right now? And the guy had picked it up. Relatively easy to have thought transference if you are a clear thinker and if you see someone's aura and project the thought against it. People do this. They play games with it. You can distract the person that way. If they don't know the difference between their own thoughts and yours, they'll think it's their own thought. It's called suggestion at a distance. Like if you project, it is black magic. If you get angry at someone and form a picture of that person in your mind and think angry thoughts to that person, that is a form of unconscious black magic, whether you know it or not. It's going to hurt that person, and that it may happen at a critical time where they might slip and fall or something of that nature just because they've been distracted by your thoughts. So if one tries to invade someone else's psychic space, that automatically becomes black magic. Yes?
If you think of someone with love and caring,
you have to be careful. Yes, it can be distracting, and some cases it can be helpful, some cases not. It seems that the more and more that you gain control of your imagination and ability to pray or direct energy like that, the more and more things you have to be careful of. While we're talking about difficult subjects, we'll talk about another one that is common to our condition in humanity right now. And that is what happens as a consequence of sexual interactions. When people engage sexually, there is an exchange of etheric energy. Very much like the Bible says it, and the two shall become one flesh. This explains a lot of phenomena. For example, where there is a relationship that is highly sexual, it's very likely to be highly volatile. I remember the early years when I was trying to live according to the Rosicrucian teaching. I happened to live in one of those apartments where the walls were paper thin, and I was trying so hard to not have the sexual thoughts, and from the next room it was either, "Oh, Sam, you're killing me," or "Sam, you're killing me." And it's sort of a F&F syndrome, a fighting or fornicating syndrome, because when you're interacting with another person and you're etherically in them, you influence them. This is part of the reason why people who are conjugal over a long period of time even begin to look like each other. It only takes a little bit of the matrix of another person to take it into your own vital body. It only takes a very few cells to make a clone, and the same thing is true with sexual interactions. It also explains why people who have numerous sexual partners are highly confused. I don't know if I do a lot of counseling, and you can almost see the type of person who has been sleeping around. Because the person who's been sleeping around, they're taking suggestions from a lot of other people, and they're as strong as post-hypnotic suggestions. Because what happens is sex is not a mild interaction between people. It is very intense. And the very intense things, they stick. You know, what passes between one person and another. I, in fact, even believe that the reason a lot of people go to horror movies or to sex movies is because they're so undeveloped in their desire bodies that the only time they experience any thrill in their desire body is in the most extreme emotions. If they only realized that loving emotions can be every bit as intense as that, the beauty of art or the sacrifice of the altruistic activity can be every bit as intense and much more satisfying. But that's a side trip, and we're starting to get to the point where I'm getting a little desperate about getting everything said. All right. There are some gray areas. There is a kind of mediumship where the control overshadows or interpenetrates the aura of the medium. And the thoughts or emotions come through, and this is justified as saying, it's all right, I didn't take over the person's body. It's perfectly ethical. It's an all right thing to do. You can see it's a gray area, but when you see that the person is having thoughts that aren't their own thoughts, and they're not reaching out for themselves, they're not becoming more self-reliant, and they're not even responsible for what they're saying, they're not testing out what they're putting forth as truth, the gray starts to get dark pretty quick. All right. Then there is an intentional displacement of someone else's consciousness. It's a step further than projecting thoughts into someone else's vital body. Whether you see the vital body or not, you can drive the other person's vital body as far as their head is concerned. You can drive it right out of the physical body and put your own etheric body in. This is called hypnotism. Hypnotism, from the viewpoint of the Rosicrucian philosophy and from the ethic of the body is a sacred temple, hypnotism is outright black magic. The person will say to you, though, but the hypnotist helped me to quit smoking, or I lost so many pounds. Not true. Not true at all. The hypnotist quit smoking for you. The hypnotist took the pounds off. You didn't. You still have to learn to do that for yourself, and you're weaker because of it. You've allowed someone to take over your body and push you out. Your biggest responsibility in life is your body and what you do in and through your body. And you have abrogated your greatest responsibility in life. In fact, I want to be wide awake. I don't want somebody knocking me out. Then you hear the argument, but if I allow it, it's all right. This is what you hear from the hypnotist side. They allow me to do it, that's all right. I don't know about that. Let's take an analogy. We are saying that hypnotism is psychological assault. You're beating up on somebody psychologically in the same way that people beat up on people physically. The argument of the hypnotist that says it's all right because they let me do it is identical to the argument of a masochist saying it's all right, I let them beat me up. It's no less of an assault because you have allowed or invited it. We would say of the masochist and of the sadist both that there's something very sadly aberrant in that kind of relationship, something that needs healing, not something that needs justification. The same thing is true of hypnotism. Let's look at self-hypnosis. I have one sentence about that. Why anybody would want to auto-entrance themselves, I don't know. Now, there are some things that I do think are valid along this line. I think that auto-suggestion is okay if you know what you're doing and if you know the limits. What happens with auto-suggestion is when you put a suggestion in that I'm going to lift more weights, that goes into the etheric body, and in its own time it comes out, and in fact you do lift more weight. Because there is that displacement in time, it feels like it is a miraculous activity. Like there's no limit to what you can do by autosuggestion. And that's just not so. I invite anybody to autosuggest to themselves that they will retrospect perfectly every night. It's an act of freedom. Yes?
How about I don't use a watch, but I'm constantly using auto-suggestions for my time.
Yes. Yes. That's a valid use. Yes. That's a valid use.
That's about the only.
As far as I can see, I can find nothing about that. By the way, there's one other thing I guess I should say about hypnotism. There is a notion that is said that you can't make somebody do anything they wouldn't do otherwise in hypnotism. That is not true. Not true. There are ruses in the first place. Like like they say, they couldn't hypnotize you to do a murder. They can hypnotize a person over enough times, and you can say, kill the straw dummy. That's a straw dummy. And eventually the power of will that the person gets to be that the that the post-hypnotic suggestions which come out automatically become extremely powerful. All right. Regular mediumship is partial displacement. I've even seen it on educational TV. It's probably the best way. If you have to see a seance, it's probably the best way to see it, because if you see it on TV, at least you're not subjecting yourself to that environment where the entities are that are likely to take control of you. What happens is that the medium takes over the hindbrain and the nerves that control the voice box. Some of the nerves that control the facial muscles, because sometimes a person gets a different expression on their face, and they start speaking through the body. Sometimes the information is valid, sometimes it's not valid. Sometimes it's not true at all. I've seen material from mediumship that was supposedly the latest by Shakespeare, replete with bad grammar. There are those sorts of things. It doesn't seem to, the primary reason, I can't say that everything about mediumship is bad, because I think you can find good things. I know of people that started out with mediumship in fact, the Rosicrucian Fellowship at one time had a disciple. When I lived here, there was a lady from the New York Center, and she befriended this man who was a stage medium, meaning he got up on stage and did seances in a theater, and people interacted with the control. Then he read the Rosicrucian Cosmoconception, and within 1/2 a year, by a great effort of will, his control said, I'm going to make it as hard for you as can be. And in the early stages, he knocked them around and he lost teeth and everything else. But within 1/2 a year, he became a disciple. That is, he was consciously functioning in the inner worlds. He had the sensitivity, and he had the gumption. I've known people that have started with drugstore astrology books that have become probationers with the Rosicrucian Fellowship. So that for some people, if they get the experience that yes, you can interact with the inner worlds, that's enough to get them started. So I just can't pan the whole thing, but I certainly can't recommend it, not by any means. And the material that comes out is not so great. Usually it's death. When somebody loses someone, that is why they come to a medium. But as we've seen, all of the mystery schools have used death as the means to drive someone forward spiritually. This is what brought Orpheus to the mysteries. When his wife died, that's what brought him into the underworld. Yes?
I wanted to ask about people like Alice Bailey and who transmitted the...
I am ethically obligated to not speak about other organizations and specific people. I've been speaking about phenomena and principles, and if you want to apply those principles to whoever you do, that's perfectly fine. But this is a Rosicrucian summer school, and it is not my place to talk about other organizations or other people. It's just not a nice thing. If you need to know about the dead, that information will be brought to you. When my little sister died at age 26, neither of my parents are seers, but they both managed to see her. And there are other things if you're willing to put in some work. There's it's an old book. It must be about 35 years old. It's a book called Thy Son Liveth. If you want to write it down and find it, it's the story of a woman and her son who became fascinated with spiritual studies, but they realized that mediumship was not a good thing to do. So they learned telegraphy, and they made a vow that whoever would die first would tell the other one what it was really like by telegraphy. And the whole book was given to her by her son from telegraphy. They had keywords and everything else, and they brought. If you really feel you need to know something from the dead, if the Rosicrucian cosmic conception isn't enough for you, there are valid ways that you can learn from the dead that you don't have to do anything unethical. But it involves work, and if you're going to do that much work, why not do the spiritual exercises? Is my personal feeling about it, but I guess I'm stating too many personal feelings. Yes.
Who is this by?
I don't remember the author.
Oh, okay.
I don't remember the author. The title, that is an exact title. Thy Son Liveth. I'm sure that if you got onto the internet or get into the, there's a service from the Library of Congress on the internet that you can find all the titles that have ever been published in the United States, and it's a free service, and everything is available to you. Just like everything, the whole Rosicrucian philosophy is available to you on computer now, and it's in such a form that if you want to find every instance of a given word, you can get it off of the computer, and you can, if you can only remember one word of something that you read out of the entire Rosicrucian philosophy, you can key in. It may take a long time searching through it, but you can do it. Yes. Of the Rosicrucian philosophy or the Library of Congress?
No, the Rosicrucian.
I don't have it. I usually click on through. It's on the letterhead, and it's right up at the front office. All right.
One other short question. I don't know if you can answer this or not. So are you saying that in the Rosicrucian philosophy, if you do the exercises the way Max Heimdall advises that you do, then can communicate with the dead?
The Rosicrucian exercises are based on the principles of our entire evolution. That is to say, each of our exercises, like retrospection, is something, for example, that happens naturally in the whole course of evolution. It is the way God evolves us. And that the exercises as made available to us as individual humans produce the product that is intended by evolution. Again, if you want to see, to answer your question more specifically, there is not a specific exercise to be in touch with the dead, because that's again being too specific, and you're not becoming what a human being is intended to become, but you're putting yourself down that narrow path that again leads you toward mediumship. When it comes to exercises, the specific are dangerous except if you already have the general knowledge, and unless you have already unfolded in character that you know when and how to use a specific exercise, they're dangerous things to go about. Character is the all. The intent of the Rosicrucian exercises is to unfold the powers that are in humans as they have been built into us by the gods over a long period of evolution, so that we can freely use them as creative free agents within the evolution, and not necessarily to specifically, there's a lot of ethics that go along with it. But I don't want to spend too much. We're going to run over again, and I don't want to go too long. Yeah. If mediumship or hypnotism or any of the phenomena we've been talking about are carried even further, it is possible to be driven out of your body and for someone else to take over. This is called possession. And because we said that the physical world is all external, it's not so polar, everything in the ethers are everything in the ethers is polarized. And if you enter into someone else's etheric body and take it over, you can get locked in the same way that an electric motor can become phase locked. You know, what is dead-centered is the word. Electric motor becomes dead-centered. And so it is possible that sometimes people take over a body and possess it. A very ugly experience. In fact, there are cases of this. I'm not going to mention names, but there is a whole school of philosophy that is based on this man in England who suddenly started taking on different habits. He suddenly looked like a different racial face and everything else. And this man said, I am a great master and I have taken over this man's body. He was going to commit suicide anyway. I could see that he was going to commit suicide, so I just pushed him out and took the body, and now I'm writing all these great works. The works are interesting, but they're not that great. I myself wonder why anybody wouldn't help the suicide out. If you were really spiritual, you would help the guy out and not push him out. But this does happen, and he stayed locked in until the body died. There are several ways that you can tell a possession. It's the same thing as with heroin. If a person is possessed by heroin, they lose control of the pupil of the eye. You cannot focus the pupil of the eye if a person is possessed. I have a friend that was a Rosicrucian student, never made it to probationership because he didn't want to do all of those sacrifices, but he got involved with all kinds of drugs and of everything else, and very ugly magical practices. He eventually drank himself to death because he couldn't live with himself. But he used to get involved with all sorts of psychic phenomena, and he had how would you say it, an involuntary grade of clairvoyance. He said, these people asked me to come over because they said that this man was possessed. And he said, I went over there and he didn't have an aura. And he said, how is that possible that he didn't have an aura? And I told him, when a person dies and you go through the retrospection, the physical body and the etheric body, the shape of it is built into the desire body, and the desire body takes that shape. It's no longer an Ovid. And if that desire body, shaped like a physical body, takes over another body and is in there, you don't see an aura. So if you're clairvoyant, it's relatively easy to see whether somebody is possessed or not, because often they will have no aura, which is, I think, one of the meanings of why the devil casts no shadow. But that's neither here nor there. Yes.
In this last discussion you had, that also would explain walk-ins?
Yes, could explain walk-ins. If you understand the principles of what goes on, you can investigate not being a seer, and you can pretty much get the idea of what's going on. Okay, let's see. We are at time, but I refuse to leave on such negativity, because I don't want the whole afternoon to have been all negativity. And I just want to talk about a few of the things that have to do with leaving the body positively. Since we're at time, you can leave at will, but I don't like that much negativity. It's a very short page of notes. The question to ask yourself, if you're thinking about leaving the body, to what will I leave if I leave my physical body? Or another way of stating the question, into what will I associate my consciousness? If you leave your body, where are you going to go? How are you going to be awake? That is the question. That's the way the Rosicrucian philosophy addresses it. Because literally, we leave the body every night in sleep. But we're not awake. We are not conscious. The situation is analogous to premature birth. We cannot take an embryo or a fetus out of the womb at 2 months and expect it to live. The same is true with the consciousness in the physical body. We cannot take ourselves out of the physical body unless we have something to put it into. That is, we need a vehicle of consciousness. The desire body is magnificent. It has all kinds of powers, but it's more infantile than we are when we're little kids, little babies trying to reach something across the room. Relative to our desires, trying to control your desires is not an easy thing at all, and that's with the physical body to cushion it. The primary activity as far as occult development is concerned with the Rosicrucian Fellowship is the development of the soul body in the etheric vital body. That is to say, the more that we have of the white ether, the more that we have of the reflecting ether, the more likely we are to be conscious when we are out of the physical body. That is to say, we have to have something to be awake in. So let's very quickly review soul growth in the soul body part of the vital body. There are two higher ethers that are not biological ethers, but they are consciousness ethers. There is the light ether, and the light ether is bipolar. And the negative pole is associated with perception. And so the Rosicrucian philosophy teaches that if we want to perceive in the inner worlds, we have to perceive here. The more perceptive work that we do, the more accurate that perceptive work is, and especially if we look for the good, if we look for the beautiful, we don't even have to do special exercises of perception if in our daily lives we look at things and see them as they are, see what is beautiful about them, see what is good out of them. The more we do that perception, the more we attract the light ether to us. The positive pole of the light ether is associated with the faculty of heating and circulating the blood. It is what does the activating. Therefore, the more things that we activate in life, that is, the more selfless service that we do, the more we try to help out. At what I started, I had a little tiny mystical experience, and then I read the Cosmos. I started doing anything I could to do to help. And within a half a year's time, I was here working many, many hours a day, because if you do things from your heart, if you really take the light ether and do selfless service, it progresses. You get more and more and more opportunities, so that eventually it becomes the point where you have to discriminate. I can't do all of these things, and you have to choose the ones that are most important and the ones that are most meaningful. And that brings us to the other ether. So from the light ether, we have the ability to perceive and the ability to carry out action in the inner worlds when we are functioning in our soul body. From the reflecting ether is where we have the discriminating power of thought and the discriminating power of memory. That if we think, the more positive thoughts we have, the more creative thoughts that we have, the more we figure things out. We don't even, we don't have to mess in other people's lives. If we have a friend that's in trouble and they're not asking us for help, in fact, they're saying, don't help me, we can still look at their life and we can think out a solution. It may not be the solution that they take, but that is a help. That is a positive thing. It's a way that that spiritual ego knows that there is something that can be done. And from this, we understand that there are purposes behind things. So the more that we think, especially think helpful thoughts or thoughts that are related to the divine, the more we attract the reflecting ether to us. Plus, we have to be able to remember what we have experienced. And in the physical body, because the brain starts shutting down, when we think in the physical body, it's probably best to think out of the body and then just transmit it through the body. The healthiest thought is outside of the body, and then the brain can be just a transmitter. You don't kill so many brain cells. Yeah, it really is. I want to pass on that. I should be finishing up very quickly. But the more that we think things out and the more that we remember. I'm staying with Daisy, and Daisy always remembers every little thing that needs to be done for somebody that is coming to her. Now, that's the best kind of memory possible. But if you have to do other memory to keep yourself active with memory, I used to think that just the creative work, that's all there is to it. But memory is equally important because we are given lessons regularly, very lofty lessons, very pertinent lessons from the elder brothers. They're transmitted. They're in the negative pole of the reflecting ether of our soul body. And it would be a shame if we had to wait until after our death before we could see all of those moving pictures that they're transmitting to us. It would be a shame because, if we can work on retrospection, remembering it all right now, or just memorizing things if you have to get into the reflecting ether. I read about a man who retired and he didn't want to lose his memory, and he memorized the entire Iliad. The entire Iliad. Imagine that. I'm thinking, because I'm not so good with memory, I'm thinking that when I retire, I might want to memorize all of St. John's Gospel, just so I don't lose it. I don't want to lose my memory like that. Yes?
You just made a remark about if you think too much, you might kill cells. So, yeah. Which is true.
Don't think nervously. Think peacefully.
Oh,
if you have to sacrifice life, yes. I don't mean to be contradictory, but think as much as you can. If you're in a nervous dither, you can just feel the brain cells go snap, snap, snap. If you are a person of peace and of equipoise, the thinking process is not so destructive. So this is soul growth. When you attract to yourself the light ether by perception and by activating yourself to service, and the reflecting ether by remembering and by thinking, that material still has to be incorporated into the soul body. It is incorporated by the process of retrospecting. That is, by remembering the events, you draw them and you put them into the etheric body, plus the retrospection stratifies the etheric body. It's a natural thing that the biological ethers, the chemical and the life ethers, are left behind by the process of retrospection, and the higher ethers are separated so that you can leave your body without it turning into a stone or into a vegetable by taking along part of the biological ethers. It's important that the stratification take place, and the Rosicrucian exercise of retrospection does that. There are pamphlets out in front about the retrospective exercise that are excellent. By doing self-conscious, repetitive activity, living your life in a rhythm, and by doing repetitive things, whether it's poetry or whether it's praying, as long as you keep wide awake, the repetitive activity organizes your vital body. Everything in the etheric worlds is done in rhythms and in cycles. And by doing these things, you build for yourself the soul body so that you have something to put your consciousness into when you leave the physical. There is also a psychological side to it. One must become impersonal. That is, this is also accomplished through the retrospection exercises, but you can do it other ways. If you can do, as Max Heindel liked to quote Robert Burns, "Oh, would some God the gift he give us to see ourselves as others see us." And so when I built the bookstore, I built in the bathroom, I built a mirror where the two mirrors come together. When you look in there, you see not the normal mirror image, but as others see you. And I call it the Max Heindel Robert Burns Memorial Mirror. But psychologically, we must know ourselves. We must be objectively able to step out and look at ourselves psychologically and see ourselves for what we are. What is good about us, what is bad about us, where our weaknesses are, because if we get in the desire world, those beings are going to be there and they're going to try and take advantage of you. So the Rosicrucian philosophy does not say how long or how short of a time it will be before you can leave your body, before you can before you can open up clairvoyance, but it does give a safe, sure method that's based on evolution itself. It is very scientific. But whether it takes a long time or whether it takes a short time, it is safe and sound, and you can be sure that if you try to take heaven by storm, you don't stand a ghost of a chance. We'll close with the Rosicrucian prayer. O God, increase our love for Thee, so that we may serve Thee better from day to day. Let the words of our mouths and the meditation of our hearts be acceptable in Thy sight, O Lord, our strength and our Redeemer.
Thank you.
Thank you.